All right, hello. Just explaining a back workout routine that I did, 3/18/2025. This one was it was inspired by a workout that I saw on YouTube, a Dorian Yates back workout. Of course, I'm not as big as Dorian Yates. I'm not as intense as Dorian Yates or as strong as Dorian Yates. But I did try to kind of mimic the workout. I did slightly change it to things that I had available at my home. Um, and I did change it to kind of some grip stuff in there. The first exercise I did, he used a Nautilus pullover machine, if I remember correctly. I don't have access to that, so I just did a regular dumbbell pullovers. Worked up to a heavy weight, and then I did a down set. Heavy weight for me, anyways. And then after that was underhand pull downs from a pulley. It was a single pulley, so it's kind of it feels heavier anyway. Heavier than like what you would use at the gym, because a lot of those systems use like a double pulley. So the weight that you're using on the single pulley is the actual weight, or close to it, anyways. I believe with the single pulley it is the actual weight, but I could be wrong. But same thing on the underhand pull downs, worked up to a heavier weight, and then I did a down set. I did stick to 12 reps on that whole thing. Then the next thing I did, I did want to incorporate some grip stuff on the underhand pull downs, but I decided not to this time. Maybe next time I will. Either like a fat grip or something like that. But I didn't this time. So the next exercise I did was the barbell rows. These were not strict barbell rows. I didn't rest them on the floor, except for the first rep, obviously. But did use a little bit of momentum to get the weight up, and those were done with a 2-inch axle bar. Worked up to a heavier weight for me, and then did a down set. I chose to use the axle bar, one, because I'm not that strong, and using lighter loads on the axle bar, I'll get a grip workout. So I decided to do that instead. I could have, however, tried to use straps, but I didn't feel like doing that. So the next exercise I did was single arm rows. I thought about using some fat grips on this one, and I decided not to. It was about this time that I was starting to run out of gas, so I only did 3 sets on those. And it's the same with the rear delt flies. I was pretty winded by this time, so I only did 3 sets. And that was on these movements for like the lats. On these next movements, it was more low back stuff. So I kind of regained my wind, I guess you could say. Kind of got a second wind. I think next time, if I feel that way, I might go back to the dumbbell rows and the rear delt flies and maybe get a couple more sets in. But this time I decided not to. I kind of wanted to see how sore this routine would make me. But after the rear delt flies, I went to hyperextensions. I do not have a hyperextension bench, but I do have a preacher machine, so I used that. So I kind of modified the technique a little bit, and I feel like it works. I mean, it could obviously be better, but it did work for what I was trying to do. I did feel it in my low back. And then after that, did kind of a like a Romanian deadlift. He did some partial deadlifts, and I think that they are Romanian deadlifts. I think, if I remember correctly, it's just so I did it out of the rack, so that it was kind of the same height, and I just came up, and I went down to my knees, and then up, and I did it with stiff legs. I didn't bend my legs. I kept them about straight, not locked back, but well, so not straight, stiff. So close to being straight, but not quite. You don't want to lock your legs out on these unless you're using like a light load and you're going for a stretch. These are not for a stretch. These are to hit the low back So I tried to keep the neutral low back just down to there and then up. So to the knees and then up. And I think those are I think that's what a Romanian deadlift is. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. So going for targeting my low back on those. The first couple sets I did, they were light, so I did a thumbless grip. When I got into the heavier weights, for me, obviously they're probably not heavy for some, but for me, I added straps so I could really focus on working my low back and not really worrying so much about holding on to the weight. So I worked up to kind of a heavier weight and then did a down set. The hyper extensions, I was able to get a few more sets in. I think I did a total of 7. Because I mean, I just with that machine there, they weren't too taxing on my low back. I'm sure with the actual hyper extension bench, I would have tired faster. But like I said, when I got to the low back movements, I kind of got a second wind in my lats, and I think I could have went back and did a few more sets of the dumbbell rows and the rear delt flies, at least done some down sets since I didn't do any on those. But I wanted to gauge how sore this would make me. So far, not too bad, but we'll see in a couple days. So that was my kind of rendition of the Dorian Yates back workout. Nothing probably like his actual workout. I'm sure it was much more grueling. But this was semi-difficult for me, especially after the 3 exercises I did at the beginning. And I did 6 total sets on those 3. And once I got those done, I was pretty winded, to tell you the truth. So it was pretty tough, especially dumbbell rows. Dumbbell rows really take a lot out of me. I don't know why. Especially when I do heavier, or not heavier, but higher reps. They really wind me. They're almost like cardio. It's crazy. So if you want some cardio, do some dumbbell rows, like for high reps. I think it's cardio. It feels pretty strenuous to me, but I'm sure that's the same on pretty much every exercise. Some are worse than others, but dumbbell rows give me a lot of cardio, that's for sure. I would say, I don't know what the hardest exercise was. They were all they not too bad. I haven't done Romanian deadlifts in a while, so maybe that one was probably the roughest one, I guess, especially with it being the last exercise. I did them in the order that were in the video, so I'm not for sure if this is the order that he used. It's kind of the order I went by because the YouTube video had it in that order. I'm not for sure why you would save the Romanian deadlifts for last. Kind of feel like you'd want those to be first, get them out of the way, but it wasn't too bad putting them there. But yep, that's a back workout that I did on 3/18/2025. Mimicked Dorian Yates back workout. And that's it. That's all I got. So hopefully this answered a few of the questions about what I did and why. And if you have any questions or comments, just leave them down below. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.